Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this closing plenary of this year's industry strategy meeting of the Forum. The theme of this particular session is Shaping Innovative Societies in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I'm Rick Sammons, one of the Forum's managing director and also a member of its managing board. We've got a very interesting session to bridge between the industry discussions I've been having this week toward the broader theme that the Forum is really investing in, which is this notion of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, not just as a description of the change that's going on in the world, but how society needs to mobilize to address it such that it benefits society. We've got a terrifically distinguished group up here of panelists to help us think about that. And this is altogether appropriate for us because from this meeting we go into some strategy discussions with our advisory board, some members of which are here on the panel. We'll be hearing from Hiroaki Nakanishi, who is executive chairman of Hitachi, and moreover, he is the current chair of Keidanren, which is the Japanese Business Federation, as well as being a partner of the Forum in our center here. Secondly, we've got Nancy Brown, who is Chief Executive Officer of the American Heart Association. She is got a long and distinguished career in various aspects of health, and we are also privileged to have her as a partner, and she, I think, embodies this notion that there is a lot of social opportunity but potential risk involved in these issues. Thirdly, Tess Posner, who's Chief Executive Officer of AI for All. This is a particular organization that is trying to be proactive and addressing a very important aspect of this topic, which is to make artificial intelligence more diverse and inclusive and to ensure that it's developed responsibly. She was formerly managing director of TechHire, which was a national initiative launched out of the White House to increase diversity in the tech economy. And moreover, we're very happy to have Michael Muller with us here. He's Director General of the United Nations Geneva. Geneva is the seat of a very large proportion of the United Nations work and institutions, and he is the head of that function. He has a long and impressive career in various aspects of the UN system, including as Director for Political Peacekeeping and Humanitarian Affairs, has worked in the Office of the Secretary General, and we know from many discussions with him, is a forward thinker about many of the governance and cooperation challenges that the world faces. Let me just make a couple of contextual comments to get the conversation going. The technological progress that we've been discussing here and the Forum is working on in the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution presents great promise, I think, for society. Potential improvements in health, quality of life, convenience of new low-cost services, better government services, many, many opportunities one can envision from the innovation that is being unleashed right now in various domains. But at the same time, we know that this innovation and change poses potential risks and unintended consequences for societies. Public safety and security issues are certainly paramount in some of the debates we've already seen. Privacy, access and inclusion, employment, discrimination and bias, transparency. We're already beginning to see these kinds of debates surface in boardrooms, in newspapers, in public policy, legislative settings, and the like. So a fundamental question hanging over this entire stage of innovation is how to bring societies along and maintain the trust and confidence in the very notion that change and disruption from technology and progress will in fact elevate the human condition rather than diminish it, raise broad living standards and economic opportunity rather than retard or polarize them further, and indeed strengthen the social fabric rather than weaken it. There are plenty of signs that we haven't done such a good job in many countries of navigating this path in the previous industrial revolution. There are a lot of strains in society we're already seeing from the changes that have unfolded over the last couple of decades or so. And the premise of the forum's work on the Fourth Industrial Revolution is that we better do better in this regard in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It'd be better to be proactive about this challenge rather than to lean back and see how it all works out in this regard. And in instrumentalizing that concept, I think everybody would agree that it's better to be proactive about these risks and opportunities rather than be passive and wait for brush fires of debates to happen and react to them. The issue is, how do you instrumentalize that? What do you actually do in this regard? And so today's session is about that very practical question. Our point of departure for our work is that we need to engage all stakeholders in direct dialogue on the one hand and concrete collaboration on the other in the co-design and learning from experience about how to strike the right balance in public policy, corporate governance, and other practices. How can we mitigate the risk and maximize the opportunities for society from these technological advances? How do we strike that right balance? And so let me begin with you, Mr. Nakanishi. What do you see from your vantage point about some of the more significant technological disruptions and changes that are coming down the track over the next 10 or 15 years? And what do you see as some of the particular social risks or conversely opportunities from them that would be useful to engage stakeholders in a discussion about sooner rather than later?
Yes, you already pointed out some of the digitalizations may cause of the positive side or negative side, both of them. But now the very important point is that such a digital transformation enable us to making a very clear future. That is visibilities of the data is a really important point. So in Japan, that we are setting up what the future is, so that we setting up the society 5.0. That is the super smart society. But now reality is that we have a lot of the social issues, aging societies and increasing of the healthcare costs, or some of the how to making a new innovation age, or those are a lot of things to be solved. So how to setting up the common goals from the viewpoint of the government, industry, academisms, all of them get together, setting up the common goal. That is a very important point, so that we are seeking for the Society 5.0, the very important schemes for the future design. So those kind of the target sharing will make the real solution approach. We would like to share of such a solution approach among us in the world. That's the very positive side of the pushing up of the digital transformations.
Good. Thanks. I mean, you talked about Society 5.0. Could you explain a little bit more about that for the group here? Not everyone is as up to speed on how forward-thinking the Japanese government and society and business community are in this regard.
Yeah, speed is a very important part of the transformation. So the collaboration with the WEF is a very important factor. So that recently we setting up the establishing of the Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution in Tokyo to making a more open, transparent discussions to setting up the futures.
Okay, thank you. Nancy, from your vantage point in the health sector or otherwise, what do you see as some of the more significant transformations coming down the track from technological advancements, and what social issues, either on the positive or risk side, do you think we need to engage on?
Yeah. You know, it's, I think for those of us who work in the health industry, the capabilities that are being enabled with all of these new technologies can absolutely, if applied correctly, remove many of the disparities that exist currently in identifying and treating people who have disease. If you look worldwide, and if we think about access to health and health care, whether you're here in the United States, a developed developed nation where you can, live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and live 3 miles outside of the city and have no access to health care and have 20 years less life expectancy, whether you live in a developing nation or whether, you're a person of extreme wealth. The healthcare system is not working for people the way it should. And so we believe that new technologies can enable patients and the public to bring healthcare into their own hands. We believe that technologies, especially in developing countries, can replace a lot of the infrastructure that's been built in developed nations. If you think about, take the United States, the entire healthcare system revolves around expensive hospitals, expensive facilities, expensive techniques and procedures. And if you look into the future and how technology might change that, we could wake up one day in a great way and find that developing countries have been able to bypass all of this investment in expensive infrastructure and have healthcare in the hands of providers and of patients in a much more significant way. So the promise is great. The concern about things like privacy and data is very significant. We all should be very concerned about our health data and where that data could end up. And so issues around privacy, around access to data are things that we think a lot about at the American Heart Association, and this move that the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution has around thinking about global data privacy standards is a very important topic and initiative. The other thing I would say, when you think about applying technology to scientific rigor that can come to develop new treatments, new therapies, or new ways of treating patients for diseases they might have, the technology itself has no bias. And so when you look at clinical trials that are done, the lack of representation of women and underrepresented minorities in clinical trials where drugs and devices are ultimately developed, for use worldwide, there's a lot of bias, a lot of lack of representation. So these new technologies can allow us to get to answers more quickly and to involve people more broadly if we can create that bond of trust around de-identified data being used for science. So those are a few of my thoughts.
Good. That's a very significant agenda in and of itself. Tess, AI for all. We just heard mention this issue of bias and whatnot. It'd be interesting to hear from you what specific aspects of the AI world do you think are ripe for or really require some multi-stakeholder dialogue and possible common work?
Absolutely, thank you. So obviously, AI is has a lot of exciting promise to be applied to solving some of the world's greatest challenges today. However, I really believe that, to echo your point, if we're not inclusive at the early stages of its development, and that goes for really any disruptive technology that's driving the Fourth Industrial Revolution, if we're not inclusive at the outset, we risk the benefits not being shared or issues like bias cropping up. And AI is more and more becoming embedded into our daily lives. A recent Gallup poll showed that 85% of people in the US use AI every day. But most people don't know it. It's pretty ubiquitous, it's pretty invisible, and it's now kind of shaping more and more decisions that are really life-changing, like who gets a job, who gets access to financial services or a loan, who gets parole. And we're seeing that existing societal biases are getting embedded and sometimes amplified in these systems. For example, facial recognition software systems have been studied and have a harder time recognizing non-white faces. Or sexism that's cropped up in online translators, or racial bias that's creeping into parole systems that help judges hopefully make better decisions when it actually turns out to be biased. And so inclusion and diversity is a really critical root cause to mitigate negative impacts like bias, and also to maximize some of the exciting benefits that we all think are possible with these powerful technologies. I think there are really incredible moonshots that are possible with AI. So I am lucky enough to run an organization that works directly on this issue, and we bring women, minorities, and low-income young people into the field at an early age and expose them to AI, and many of them go back to use this technology to solve problems in their own communities. I'll give you the example of Stephanie, who is one of our program graduates, and she's a first-generation Mexican-American daughter of farm workers who grew up in a very low-income family. And she started an AI club at her high school, so she's educating other students about it. And she's bringing this technology back to her community to try to apply it to water contamination issues, working with a mentor. And so the more we are inclusive and bring more people into the field, not only will we mitigate risks, but we're going to achieve some of the moonshots that we're also excited about, and uncover untapped talent that might develop these moonshots in the next big thing.
The notion of an AI moonshot is a rather compelling one. Give us your favorite, one or two possible moonshots.
So I think in the healthcare field, it has tremendous potential to increase access. Whether there's a lot of, debate around how much AI can replace or augment existing healthcare professionals. I'm sure you'd have a lot to say about that. But I think in terms of making healthcare broadly more accessible, there's incredible promise there, as well as tackling issues of disaster relief. Like we're seeing, that robots can go into situations where humans can't and actually target those relief efforts and do that safely instead of, risking human lives, whether it's a forest fire, an earthquake, or other things that may just get exacerbated through climate change issues in the next 10 to 20 years. So I think in the healthcare space, climate change and around relief efforts are some of the ones I'm most excited about.
Do you see anyone or any coalitions coming together to try to begin to move down that track and develop that kind of a model?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there are a lot of different organizations and companies that are investing in this type of research, but I think ultimately it needs to be made more accessible so that we can have this technology available for more people to try to solve problems in their own communities. Because a lot of the investment right now is very concentrated, either through governments or in big companies. And I think we need to democratize that access so that more people can use this powerful tool. And I think that's the most ethical way to do it as well.
Great. Thanks very much, giving us a concrete flavor of what the future might hold in a very positive sense. Michael Muller, you've been at the heart of really important progress in the multilateral system the last few years in developing big common agendas. You might, in a way, think of them as global moonshots, if you will, the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Climate Agreement. How do you react to this question we put on the table here of how do we maximize the benefits of technology, mitigate the risks through engagement of stakeholders proactively?
Thank you, Rick. Well, first of all, let me say that I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. One of my frustrations over the past couple of years is that when we discuss technology and the impact it's going to have on our lives and on the way we do business, it's usually the dark side we hear about and the dark side we talk about. So it's really refreshing to be part of a conversation where every comment has been a forward-looking, positive one. I think to answer your question, let me just pick out two words that are at the center of what we need to do. One is partnerships, and the other one is prevention. And both of these feed on each other, and if we do it right, they will translate into us humanizing technology and not allowing technology to sort of technologize humanity, which I think is at the very heart of what we need to do. I think at the more I see and the more we look at how we are going to organize ourselves at a time when we are in a really fraught situation. The planet is not in a very healthy state. We are in a kind of a perfect storm situation where we have massive existential problems facing us, climate being the first one of them, but quite a few others. We are in a transitional phase in terms of governance at all levels of our societies, both at the international, the regional, the national, the local. Added to that, you have the pressures of fast-moving technological changes. And the only way that we're going to be able to adapt to that and to make sure that we collectively ensure that our planet is a good place to live in for our kids and for their kids, is if we do it together. I think it's more and more clear that the problems we're faced with today cannot be solved by anyone alone, not as any single country, any single organization. That has led us to a number of tools. In many ways, you mentioned them before, Rick, counterintuitively agreed to by everybody. 2.5 years ago, there was a whole series of policy statements, policy frameworks that were agreed by the world. The two major ones were the climate agreement in Paris, and the other one were the Sustainable Development Goals, who have given us a global roadmap and a page on which everybody is increasingly finding themselves to a degree that we've never seen before. It's actually changing the mindsets, it's changing the way we work, and it's pushing everybody into bringing together and bringing to the table a very different kind of matrix management of the affairs of the planet that is a complete necessity, but also the positive aspect of that is that it's happening organically more and more and just needs to be speeded up. Part of the reason is that the underlying principles that were at the base of these decisions, and particularly the Sustainable Development Goals, are three principles that we didn't have before. One is that they're indivisible. They're completely interlinked. You cannot pick one goal and say, I'm going to go and do that in my corner. You have to look at it in its entirety. We've talked about health today, but there's no way to talk about health unless you talk about gender, unless you talk about development, unless you talk about governance. You know, all of the aspects of human activity are interlinked. The second one is that the world decided that it was going to leave no one behind. That's a very new, if you want, concept, because it means that we have accepted the fact that such a thing as poverty is not just something that happens down south in some poor country. It happens right in our midst, in this country and everybody else's country. I live in Switzerland. That is normally considered a rich country. I was quite surprised when I opened a paper one day and saw that 800,000 people in Switzerland live below the poverty line. So we are all in it. And the third one is that it's all everybody's responsibility. The way there were these agreements and these policy frameworks were negotiated, as opposed to most of the others in the past 70 years, was not entirely top-down. It was not just governments who sat around the table. The Paris Agreement would not have happened without the business community's really very strong involvement in getting to the results. The SDGs would not have happened if it wasn't for a whole series of other stakeholders, including about 10 million people the UN was online with during the negotiations to get there. So the ownership level is very different, and the understanding of how they work and the sort of the logic in them makes that we are now in a place where we work in a very different way. That's where we need to be. We need to enforce it. We need to make it much stronger, if you want. It doesn't. We were just discussing this before. One of the problems that we haven't tackled yet is how do we ensure that all of this is done in an ethical way, in a way that is a global agreement. In other words, that we have a set of rules of how we're going to manage our planet that everybody's bought into, and a decision, a global decision and a collective decision on who is going to be the police and what are going to be the consequences of unacceptable action. And this goes across all the elements of technology. So I'm not going to go on longer, just except to, at the end, and one of the things that has come to my mind more and more in the conversation here over the last 3 days, is that I'm coming around very clearly to the realization that we have to look at technology not as just a tool, but as a partner. And when I talk about partnership, it means everybody has to be around the table, but technology has to be seen as a much more integrated element in our decision-making process and the way that we are going to look at life in the next decades to come, except just something that we use whenever it's needed in very specific areas.
Well, that's a big challenge for the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal, and climate agendas. You've been deeply involved, as I referred to earlier, in the development of those big goals, big agendas. To what extent has technology really been an explicit and significant factor in the development of those agendas?
I think the understanding of the importance of it in all aspects of human activity is growing, and we're beginning to see more and more aspects of it in the implementation of these objectives. Let me give you a very practical example that we're working on right now. A country in Africa, Niger, that is at the very bottom of the pile in terms of development, decided that they wanted to leapfrog their situation, their development situation. And the way to do that in their mind was to, they decided to wire 15,000 villages with electricity and the internet. And through that completely change the lives of the citizens in those villages. It's a really poor country with huge challenges, both in terms of transport, in terms of technology, and all of this stuff. By a chance, I met the fellow who's advising the president on that, and when I listened to him, I realized that we could help him. We have created what we call the 2030 ecosystem in Geneva, which, just to step back for a moment, is really the technological hub and the operational hub of the international system, with an enormous amount of actors that work on practically every aspect of human activity. The tagline here is that there's not a single person on the planet that isn't touched every day by something that comes out of that town, that city. So we took this fellow who had good ideas, and they had developed a plan, but they didn't have the financing, they didn't have really the knowledge or the network to get to the people that could be able to help them. And we dropped them into this ecosystem we created with over 200 actors from all walks of life. And all of a sudden, miracles started happening, both in terms of financing, in terms of access to technology, in terms of helping them to get where they want to do. Hopefully, we'll get the Fourth Industrial Revolution Institute to also help us. But to me, quite apart from the element itself, the importance of this kind of example is that if we manage in the next couple of years to show that Niger has gone up the list of poor countries, then we will have proven that working together, working in a matrix management type of style, breaking down the silos and bringing in different actors that most people didn't even think of bringing into this equation, will actually be a proof of concept that you get a lot more for your bang if you work for your dollar, if you work collectively, than if you do it in the kind of slice salami approach that we've done for the past 70 years.
I mean, we suspect that there is a lot of upside potential in connecting a variety of the technologies and the business models that are being worked on, represented by people here in the room, with countries and subnational jurisdictions, cities, that are now busily developing their climate plans, their nationally determined contributions on the one hand, or their sustainable development goal plans on the other, but there's really no international framework yet to connect in that way. So your admonition of we need partnership and anticipation is a crucial one. But let me bring Mr. Nakanishi into this. I think one of the things that's very special and fascinating about Japan is the long-standing, active working partnership between the business community and the government, and particularly between Keidanran, which you now chair. This could be a bit of an example of the kind of cooperation, stakeholder cooperation, that could be useful. Could you give us some sense within Keidanran right now about some of the planning and thinking and discussions with the government about how to maximize the benefits of this fourth industrial revolution? What concrete work are you doing with the government?
We have setting up some specific field. The healthcare is already, you discussed that's a big issue.
Yes.
And the other is that aging society. Society itself is aging. It's a little bit common with the US. For example, the infrastructures we constructed 50 or 60 years ago, and how to maintain it. But the currently that we are facing of the decrease of population issues simultaneously, so that how to reduce all the maintenance and operating cost. This is a real common goal from the viewpoint of the private side and public side. The various infrastructure is shared by the public and private. So the how to setting up the real, the common database to maintain of the current data, also the IoT, the gathering of the data from the current status of all of infrastructure facilities. It's a very strong the weapons to reduce of the cost and what the more well-planned of the maintenance. That's a very typical example to collaborate between public and private. That's one of the typical examples so that many people can understand what the reality of the digital transformation means. Those activities is really the great motive force to promote of the fourth industrial revolutions.
Nancy or Tess, any other concrete illustrations of the kind of cooperation we're talking about here that you've seen?
Sure. I'd be happy to highlight one. One of the priorities of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution is precision medicine, which is an area we're very focused on at the American Heart Association. About 3 years or so ago, the American Heart Association and Amazon together created a framework, marketplace, if you will, for data. You know, in order to get to precision medicine in cardiovascular disease or any disease, you know, data is at the center. And so how could we, the American Heart Association, as an honest broker, an organization that only exists, we have no shareholders except, you know, the global public and patients. That's why we exist, to serve that group of shareholders. You know, how could we take the scientific expertise of the American Heart Association and the resources of the AHA as this country's second largest funder of cardiovascular research, and bring that to bear to get to precision cardiovascular medicine. So AHA and Amazon work together. We created this data marketplace. For those of you who buy things on Amazon, you know, you shop around, you see different kinds of data or different kinds of products. We wanted to be able to do that with data, to create a safe place for pharmaceutical companies, governments, our own data from, you know, the billions of dollars of scientific research that we have funded over time, longitudinal studies that are happening in the U.S. and internationally. A rate-limiting step to advancing science more quickly is access to other people's data. We wanted to break that down. So we have built the technical infrastructure. We've recruited internationally companies and academic institutions, governments to contribute data, and we now are creating a global data collaboratory with many funders of research, so that this marketplace can be the house for this data. And then the question is, how do you keep it safe? How do you provision it for study? And ultimately, how does it help impact health outcomes? How can it be used to create real-world evidence for clinical trials so data and evidence can happen more quickly to develop drugs, to develop new devices, and to get health into the hands of people? How can you create an environment where individuals feel confident in donating their own data from their sensing devices, their mobile phones, their Apple Watches, their wearables? You talked earlier about facial recognition. You know, there's a magnificent study going on right now in science looking at facial recognition on, you know, phones for people to get early indications of disease. You know, someone who might be at risk of having a stroke or a TIA, somebody who might be an early Parkinson's patient. You know, how can all of this come together in a secure place? And so this is the work we're doing at the AHA to try to bring together technologies, governments, companies, and individuals, all to work together for this promise that healthcare can be easier, more accessible, have more value, and take away the bias and the barriers that exist today.
Do you see some of that activity going on in other countries that you're trying to learn from or connect to?
Connecting for sure. So we have created this global data partnership with many international institutions that will work together, governments and organizations that will work together to create this data marketplace. So that work is well underway.
Yeah, I'd love to add an example to that. So we run education programs that are focused on populations that are most at risk of being left behind in the fourth industrial revolution, specifically exposing them to the innovation economy and AI. And we work with a lot of the top AI research institutions like Stanford, UC Berkeley, Carnegie Mellon, Princeton, and others, and we hope to go international as well. And we're actually working very, very closely with AI research labs and computer science departments to design what we call human-centered AI projects that are applying this technology for good and really embedding an ethical framework and socially responsible framework at the very beginning of when people learn. So kind of thinking about the ground up here and how education can play a role when we take the best talent and the best research being done in advancing these technologies for good and bringing everyone into that conversation. And so bringing communities that would otherwise be left out into the middle of where this research is actually happening. And then we're also working with companies who are investing heavily in AI to provide mentors because the mentorship is so critical in terms of building these skill sets and success in those careers. I think from a broader perspective, there are a lot of efforts going on bringing different stakeholders to the table to create ethical standards for how we develop AI technology. So several examples include Partnership on AI, which some of you may be familiar with or even members of, which is a coalition of companies and organizations and stakeholders trying to create standards. And then there's IEEE, the AI and Ethics Initiative, which is working to create standards, and they have a paper called Ethically Aligned Design. It's available online for free if anyone wants to check it out, and it's been compiled by working groups of professionals in the field. We just co-launched with them the first ever youth committee to get young people involved in actually shaping these standards, because the generations that are young people today are going to have to live with whatever decisions we all make, so we should include them in those decision-making processes.
I'd like to ask you, given the speed with which AI is progressing and its applications are progressing, are you optimistic or pessimistic that this kind of collaborative work on norms and practices to ensure, that the technology ultimately benefits people, society? Do you think that work you're optimistic that's going to keep pace with the mushrooming application of this technology out in products and services, or not?
That's a great question. So I think the first step is creating the standards, obviously, which is happening, but I think there are two different issues that I worry about, but I still am optimistic because I'm an optimist. Mm-hmm. But I worry about incentives. So we create these standards, but what are the incentives for adopting these standards, especially among fast-growing startups that want to get products to market quickly? And then I also worry about regulation, the needed regulations, smart regulations, not those that are going to stifle innovation, but those that will help protect individual rights and privacy will not keep pace. So I think that businesses, every business and stakeholder in the mix has a role to play as well, so we can't rely on these kind of high-level standards or even regulations to come out, but how do we actually adopt protocols internally for ethical development and deployment of these technologies, whether it's adopting existing standards, creating training or protocols internally, ensuring diversity and inclusion in the product teams that are actually building these things, getting really nitty-gritty with how you're testing these products before they get launched into the wild, and then actually looking at edge cases and unintended consequences through every stage of the product life cycle, and then after it's out in the world, making sure to monitor that. So I think that there's a responsibility for this collaboration on a higher level, but also that we need to take action at a very detailed individual level, whether it's a company, a startup, or even as individuals to advocate for this. We can't wait for that to happen from above.
And the people who are investing in the startups are, often not thought about in terms of these ethical frameworks. That is an important market for us to think about. There's a lot of capital flowing into a lot of these technology companies, and of course, everyone wants them to grow and be successful, but if we could get the venture investing community globally involved in developing and agreeing to a set of ethical standards that they will hold the companies they're investing into, that would be very important. We, for example, have a venture fund at the American Heart Association, and this is a conversation that we've had, with the people that are helping to make the decisions about where our money and the money of our partners, UPMC and Philips, will be invested, and what kinds of, not just what kinds of technologies and what kinds of outcomes for patients will be developed, but how is that going to, what is the character of the companies that we're investing in? I think we've got to back it up, and make sure that all of the people who are helping these technologies get to market buy into this.
Yeah, the frameworks are still at a very nascent stage in this regard, right? So just as a point of information, a couple of the initial pieces of work that we're organizing with respect to these kinds of ethical frameworks is one, is a body of work to develop some guidelines for government procurement of AI products and services. And then, because obviously governments often set a very important standard, they have a very strong incentive effect on markets, since they're large purchasers of various types of equipment. And the second one, related to that, is a framework for boards of directors of companies or other types of institutions. What should be the framework of questions they should be asking of their management teams and other issues that really ought to be within the purview of a well-functioning corporate governance process in respect of AI? What are some of the risks that could be embedded in the production of AI-related products and services, or the purchase and application of them that could pose some significant risk to the firm down the line as a risk consideration? So, but let me bring us toward the close of this panel just by asking the other colleagues on the panel whether you have any particular worries, or are there things that you're particularly concerned about or pessimistic or very optimistic about in this landscape of whether cooperation that we've talked about is going to be able to keep pace with the rapid pace of technological innovation?
Yeah, that's very serious attention required. Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, that's it's a little bit different from the simple technology revolutions. That how to setting up the goal, how to accelerate of the change. Those are actions always the review, transparent, open. That's a very, very important part of that. So that's a background why we need a real collaboration among the public sector, private sector, and also the academic sectors.
Michael, from your vantage point?
We don't have a choice. We have to do it. I think it was interesting, the last part of the conversation was about ethics and about rules of the game. I think when you think back of the past 70 years and we realize the extraordinary state of well-being that the human race finds itself in, to a very large extent is because we managed to put in place a whole set of rules, norms, and agreements on how we're going to run our affairs. And we have to get back to that. If we don't get our planet back to a rules-based and ethical-based and norm-based management, we are going to be in trouble. And I think we can. One of the things that we're doing, just to bring you up to date, is I think that the realization of, as we've seen today on the panel, that this is needed is increasingly coming to the fore. And we, as an organization, are being asked to, in essence, provide the neutral table around which many of these conversations can take place. So the Secretary General is about to announce a high-level panel in the next couple of weeks that will advise him on how, and the panel will be composed of people from all walks of life, and on how to position the system in such a way that it can be most useful to these conversations. I think that it's possible. I think that it's, again, imperative that we do so in a collaborative way. I was listening to many of the different initiatives that are happening at all sorts of levels of society. All of this somehow we have to bring into a coherent whole. And I think we can do it. I think we don't have a choice, as I said before. One of the positive elements of a human being is that we have a very strong survival gene. It usually kicks into place when the knife is at our throat. That knife is there right now, and we just need to get on with it.
Thank you. This conversation has provided a good window for all of us, I think, into the challenge that we're facing in this regard, and kind of the work program that we're planning here in the forum on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Could you please join me in thanking such a great panel?